Hi everybody, Jack Blankenship here. I just thought I'd share another testimony with the people out there. When I was younger, I traveled a ways from the house for work because I was a roofer. And on one occasion, I lived in San Luis Obispo, California, and I worked in Tulare, California for a roofing company. And every weekend I'd commute home. And this didn't last very long because it was just a seasonal thing. And as I went about my week, I ran out of money. And my boss told me that on Friday that I could get my check from the office and go run to the bank and cash it. And then Friday morning pops up, and they had to send me to out of town to a little town called Porterville to help finish a job that Friday. And we didn't get back in till late that evening. They opened the office for us and let us get our checks. Now I'm half a tank minimum in gas required to get from my workplace to the place I worked to my home in San Luis Obispo. It takes over a half a tank to go there. And so I didn't know what to do. It was late at night, like 8:30, 9 o'clock. I didn't know where I could cash my check. I didn't know any places in town. The banks weren't open. And I looked at my gas gauge, and I had a quarter tank of gas. And I had an old Econoline van, Ford Econoline van, and it ran okay, but it got terrible gas mileage. And I knew that I wouldn't make it home. But it's Friday night. I want to see my family. Church is on Sunday. I think I was ushering in church at the time, and I stepped out on faith, and I prayed about it, and so I just figured I'd drive as far as I could until I ran out of gas, and maybe hitchhike to my house if I could get a ride real quick, and just leave my van there until the next day when I'd come get it. Now, yeah, it might have been missing some parts or something, or even been robbed quite well if I'd left it there overnight. But because I wanted to get home so bad, I really was okay with that. I wanted to, I was working with the men in church, and I think I was the leader of an organization called Royal Ambassadors that teaches young boys how to be an ambassador for Christ. And I just had so much to do at church that weekend that I just had to get home. And so I was desperate. I prayed and I prayed about it, and I said, okay, Lord, I'm just going to drive. And however far I get, I'm just going to have faith in you to get me home. And I started driving. And I drove and I drove, and I looked at gas gauge, and I went through a little town called Kettleman City, and I still had a quarter tank. I was blown away. I kept driving, and I was just waiting. I figured my gas gauge was broke, and that any minute I'd run out of gas. And it wasn't broke. I just thought maybe it had broke. And so I drove, and finally I got to San Luis Obispo. I made it all the way there. I pulled up in my driveway, and I looked down at my gas gauge, and my gas gauge had barely dropped under a quarter of a tank. I have no explanation for this other than God. God wanted me there. I wanted to be there. And I stepped out on faith. And I believe God rewards us for stepping out on faith. I believe that He makes things happen in our daily life that seem so simplistic to us that most people don't claim them as things of God. I know that I used to call chance. I used to call, things that just happened as lucky. But as I grew older in the Lord, I realized that He was making things happen for me. That the God that created the universe, the power that rose from the dead, was the same power that let that engine, that tank, that gas gauge stay the same and get me home. And I'm going to glorify God in these things that He did for me. You may not. You may still call them chance. You may say my gas gauge was broken. I didn't know it. Although it worked perfectly after that, it worked perfectly all that time. You may credit this with some other thing, but I don't. And I think that we need to start showing God to the people in our lives that what He's done for us, the little things that He does. Maybe, I have another testimony later about supplying my needs and providing for my family. But I'm going to continue giving testimonies to God. Revelations 12:11 says that the devil is beaten. His activity on the planet are beaten by the blood of the Lamb, which He's already done, and by the testimonies of the saints, faithfully not fearing death, or in some translations, unto death. Well, I hope this has been helpful to you. Look for God in your daily life, in the small things, and in everything. Walk with God. I pray this in Jesus' name. And this is a testimony of how God provided and allowed me to get home with my wife and kids. God bless.